Are we starting now, Stacy, or do we want to wait? It's 1:31. We have about 21 people. Well, maybe we can wait just a few more minutes, see if we can't pull in a few more people. Okay. You know, it's that time of year where people are just insanely busy, right? Oh, yes. Okay. Maybe two more minutes or so. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and share screen though. So I say let's start in about 1.5 minutes. We'll give time for people to kind of pop up before we begin. Okay. Stacy, do you want me to stay on screen while you're sharing your information, or do you want me to hide my video? Oh, it doesn't matter to me. Okay. I like having that sense of talking with somebody, or do you want just yourself on video? It's up to you. Honestly, I can talk to myself or I can talk to somebody else on screen. I'm good either way. Okay, well then I will go ahead and hide my video while you're sharing your information. Okay. I think we're ready. Lori's saying, should I go ahead and close my video too? Yes, go ahead and close your video and then, okay, we'll begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final webinar online CEASD session for this school year. We have made it. We are coming to the end of the school year and we're almost at the finish line. So the first 5 minutes, Stacy Katz Shapiro is going to join us to talk about the American School for the Deaf Online Academy. And then when that's done, Lori and I will do our presentation on EHDI, but I'll give the floor over to Stacy. Okay, well, hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all today. This will be very brief. I want to talk about Online Academy and just make sure that you are all aware. I know that with school wrapping up and closing out the end of the year, you may be thinking ahead to next fall and how we could support your programs. So I just wanted to give you a quick synopsis about Online Academy. So maybe you have students in your program who need more challenge, but you just can't justify making a whole new course for this student. Or maybe you have family or students in your program that you know you want to provide them a deaf school experience, but they don't want to move. Maybe they live in an area where they can't move or they don't feel ready to necessarily put their child into a dorm environment. Maybe you have available teaching positions and you're concerned about compliance with IEPs. Perhaps you have a student who really does need some tutoring or additional supplemental support for their IEP goals. And you don't have maybe the appropriate staff to provide that need, or maybe your staff is just overwhelmed or too busy and they can't really add one more thing to the plate right now. Maybe you have some students who are wanting to establish a club, but they don't have sponsors, or you don't have enough kids to really justify establishing a club. So if you have any of those types of students or families, then maybe Online Academy is the answer. So right now we are providing core subject area courses for students. So math, English, social studies, science, ASL. We're providing ASL instruction for those that are considering moving into a deaf school. but they haven't learned ASL yet, we are providing one-on-one ASL tutoring support to really get them ready to take a course with Online Academy or at a school that they're attending. We are providing support for IEP goals, additional support for content areas where maybe those students are struggling in. We are also providing ASL core language. So if you have a student who has requirements of foreign language, but they don't want to take French or Spanish or Italian, then we can provide ASL as a foreign language requirement. Here are just some quick facts. Yes, we follow the National Common Core standards. We do progress reports, report cards at the end of the courses. We do a transcript. The IEP lives at the student's home school. We are not responsible for that, but we will provide the present levels and assist in goal writing, making sure that we are updating all of the present levels, the progress reports, and the IEP goals. Our teachers are certified teachers of the deaf and have content area specialists available as well with degrees. Families can privately pay, or school programs can contract with us, and you can just contact us. For those that are in the schools, the pricing may be a little bit different than a privately paid attendance. Maybe you're thinking, oh, that's another program that's going to steal our teachers. That is not the case here. That is definitely not what our thought process is. Our teachers are paid part-time. That means they work early in the morning before they go to their regular job, or they work in the afternoon. Maybe they want to bring their foot back into the realm after taking some time off to take care of kids when they were young. Or maybe they still want to be involved because they've retired. They just don't want a full-time job. And so we are helping to really maintain the pool of teachers for your schools and for our kids. Okay, so again, students from all over the world, internationally, from all sorts of countries. And if you have any idea of something that you're wishing for, or that you want to be able to do, whatever that may be, please let us know. We will brainstorm with you and we'll figure out how and when and what that partnership and collaboration is going to look like. Okay, well, that is it for me. Hopefully you will contact us. We'll be in touch with you, and we hope you have a great wrap up to the end of your school year and enjoy your summer. All right. Thank you so much, Stacy, for joining us and explaining about Online Academy. We really appreciate that. Oh, thank you. Okay, well, I am Debbie Trapani. I am also a CEASD board member, and currently I am here with Lori Lutz from the CLER Center. We will be presenting today about the EHDI system and how that impacts what we're doing and how that impacts early language acquisition. So we are thrilled to be here to talk to you today. My role is an administrator of the National Programs and Outreach at the CLER Center. And I'm going to go ahead and let Lori introduce herself. This is Lori Lutz, so the floor is yours. Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Lutz. I am Director of Monitoring, Evaluations, and Research at the CLER Center. It is nice to quote unquote see all of you here today. Okay, great. So before we proceed, I am going to share my screen. And just a little bit of housekeeping. If there are any questions, you can include those in the chat. We will monitor the chat. I will also put the PowerPoint on the screen. Give me a minute, maybe less than a minute. Okay. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see myself, Lori, and the PowerPoint. We do also have an interpreter with us today who is off screen, but if you need her to come up on screen, we can have her do that. We have live transcript captioning available as well. This will be a recorded session so that you can watch it later on. I do want to make sure that we're recording. Yes, we are recording. I already see the little red dot at the top of the corner here. Great. Okay, well, thank you for joining us today in regarding to the EHDI system and the different components of the EHDI system and how that really does impact those who are identified at birth, deaf and hard of hearing, receiving access to early language acquisition. Now, what we know thus far about EHDI, many of us understand the critical role in a young deaf and hard of hearing child's life of language acquisition. But what we know or what we understand of the EHDI system can vary. We may know little bits and pieces here and there. But we have also been collecting some public input, which I will just abbreviate PI, but public input. Now, EHDI has had some barriers identified, so we wanted to collect some comments and really analyze those comments and share the results that we've done based on those comments in EHDI. Okay. So through our analysis, we identified 8 themes. And I'll let you just read these on the screen. So these are the 8 different areas that we identified within those comments. And I think we all really are familiar with this. But this helps give us a sense of the components related to the EHDI system and what's there. I do want to do a quick caveat. This was all before the pandemic hit, so I'm sure more concerns have arisen in the past. I believe there are 2 more themes that really are identified. One is the failure to identify early. The screening seems to have been postponed since pandemic, and then the loss of follow-up during the pandemic. Those have been the 2 main concerns most recently. So please keep that in mind. So out of these 8, these are concerns of the EHDI system. It gives us a better picture of the relationship that people have with EHDI and the different components of that system. Thank you, Lori. So for example, one of the reasons, during the pandemic, there was one state where at a hospital, they would do their testing. However, the hospital didn't allow for visitors to come in for testing because they were not patients already in the hospital. And so they had to postpone early screening during this pandemic time. And then later, they started to use nurses, but nurses started to have a really big impact because of COVID. And so there was a lot of gaps in early testing for that state. And that was one of the implications, one of the repercussions of COVID to the EHDI system. I would like to share with you all just some general information that states do have with their EHDI system. They receive their funding and they set up an EHDI committee with an EHDI coordinator that you can kind of see at the very top. So in that white box, it's the state EHDI committee. Once that's established, typically the governor is the one who kind of establishes that committee, but that will then funnel into the services provided to the families through various departments in the state. But you can see here that when a baby is born, that is typically at the hospital, at a birthing hospital. They provide the hearing screening. And if there is a need for more in-depth testing, then they're referred to an audiologist or referred to the EHDI committee. They inform the family, and then the family actually has to bring that baby to where it's referred for more in-depth testing. They could be a medical home or physicians, their PCPs, an audiologist, the parent or caregiver. So once you've done all of these testings and the child is identified as deaf or hard of hearing, they are then referred to, again, the EHDI committee, which trickles down into early intervention agencies, which are the green colored shapes that you see on this flow map. Now, with early intervention, once the families are a part of that, they set up individual family service plans, IFSPs. And you can kind of see the movement of that through the early intervention agencies. The reason we put those agencies in green and did the early intervention services, yes, there are several early intervention service providers, but they are not always familiar experts in deafness. So they go through all of this referral system and they're setting up the individual family service plans. Some states have service providers, the Part C service providers, which is why you see sort of a dotted line around that, because some states do not have that available. Now, with a Part C service provider setting up the individual family service plan, they're able to provide those services through early intervention agencies, cooperating with deaf and hard of hearing or early language acquisition. That doesn't happen often. That is actually very rare. But they try to refer all of the families out to certain service providers. And it's service providers that have been identified within the IFSP. Now, some of them do have their expertise in deafness, early language acquisition, and some are able to provide services that are familiar with early language acquisition and deafness. And those are the pink colored boxes, early childhood educators that are familiar, are experts within the field. There are some agencies that have these service providers available, but through all of this flow map, you see so much movement that it really delineates the delay that can occur in this whole system and process from parents and students receiving these services. All of this goes to the parents or the caregivers, and they're the ones in blue, but you see the flow map here and how delayed that process can be before a student or family receives these services. Sometimes that connection happens fairly quickly, and sometimes that connection doesn't happen and there's gaps. But this is what, in general, overall, the state EHDI system looks like. Now, each state is going to be different, but this is what it looks like from receiving funding, setting up the committees, and then how the services are provided. Okay, so our team, we are the Regional Early Acquisition of Language Project, the REAL team. We receive federal funding, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. But once we receive that funding, it is used to focus on early language acquisition. Our work is to analyze and categorize those people who need services, who need information related to early language acquisition. Now, once all of this is identified, it doesn't mean that we know the names of all of these agencies and individuals. It's really more categorized for our purposes. So in the yellow, we call those the first responders. Typically, once an infant is born in the hospital and the screening happens, those are the individuals who have first contact with the family. So the first responders. Sometimes that's the audiologist, the pediatrician. Sometimes it's a candy striper who works at the hospital helping with information. So those are the first responders, the yellow. Then in the green, we have early intervention service providers. That's in general early intervention provision. So whether they have training or are familiar with deaf and hard of hearing, that is not typical, but this is just in general. Who are those service providers? In the pink, we call them early childhood educators because they are familiar with early language acquisition and with deafness. So we call those early childhood educators, ECE. So that's the difference between the green, early intervention, and the pink. And then the blue are the parents, the caregivers of those children identified as deaf and hard of hearing in the age range of birth to 3. Those are the 4 categories that we use to really help us assess the EHDI system and find those gaps and those targeted areas where that technical service or assistance needs to happen. But this helps us to really analyze where we need to hone in. Okay, now, so I just talked about the flow map of the states in general for the EHDI system, but you may have noticed first contact with early language acquisition individuals happens on the back end. The family has to navigate through so many different areas in order to get to the early language acquisition services for their child. Some miss that connection in totality. Some, it's a very delayed occurrence of connection, and some it may happen quickly, but it does take a while before that focus comes into early language acquisition and those services. So the window seems to take a long time before that window is even cracked open. It may take 6 months, a year. If you're fortunate, maybe a month or 2 before that connection is made. It really does depend on the states. Some states really do have a good hierarchy and process, and some states not so great. But even if that connection is made, is it a strong connection? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. How soon can we connect families and caregivers to those pink early childhood educators, those that do have the experience? So it is a very severe occurrence of delayed connection with those services. So related to the public input and the findings that we had there, we did draw some conclusions. Go ahead, Debbie. Okay, there we go. So exactly what Debbie was saying, the challenge is navigating the system, this complex system. And these are from individuals that have very little knowledge to no knowledge of deafness, early language acquisition, and trying to navigate the EHDI system. How can we establish the system within your state to really develop those connections in a quick, timely manner for parents and professionals? And that's part of the work that we're doing, trying to figure out how to really approach this at a deeper level. And then second thing, right, it's language bias and beliefs directly impact delivery and resources. So the professionals, their knowledge and understanding of language. Some may have specific beliefs related to ASL and spoken English, and those biases are what the parents are receiving from those people. Number 3, I think this is the hardest part of all within EHDI work. The families are so significant. They need that support in order to support their children. But how do we reach out to those families? How do we provide that information, that support? How do we engage them in the process? That is one of our biggest challenges. And I would say the most important work that we do other than the screening. And the 4th conclusion is just, I mean, one thing that we have to think about, one thing that we learned recently is there's a lot of turnover in the EHDI system. So how do we develop that rapport with families and then quickly leave and expect it to be maintained? We may have to reteach people that come into these positions. So the high turnover, the pay is not fantastic. The support of resources is lacking. And those can be reasons for high turnover. And as Debbie already explained, each state system varies. And so how they're using their funding, how the governor is making decisions with allocating those funds, and how the system is set up and formatted for their state, for their agencies and organizations. Okay, all right. Now, just to tack on to what Lori was saying, adding to number 2, many of us have known this and recognized this for a while now, and we have our own opinions and beliefs about language, and that is another direct impact to all of this. So what we assessed within the EHDI system and its process related to the categories in that particular group, how they access early language acquisition for deaf and hard of hearing children. So if you notice the yellow here, the first responders, what is the message that they are sending to families? They will say, your baby failed the hearing test. I'm sorry, or oh my. That already in itself is a very traumatic message, and it stays with those families for quite a long time. So if there's a hearing screening, just informing of the facts. It's not a big deal. The hearing screening occurred. These are the results. But the impact to the families start from day one when that hearing screening happens, and how we send out that message of what occurs during the screening. And then early intervention service providers. Again, what is that message that they're saying? These are individuals that are not experts or not as familiar with deafness and early language. And so they will advise based on their beliefs or their biases, but they don't have the other information to share. So they'll talk about cochlear implants or what they know, but they don't share what they don't know. And oftentimes it is not comprehensive or reflective of options that are out there for families. There's very little information that is still shared with families at this time. And they're not really getting that information until they're connected with those experts, but that doesn't happen until much later. Therefore, there's the gap. Now, we put something here in gray, and at the bottom, you can see that that's any professionals providing services to the family. Any, that could be yellow, green, pink, whatever it may be. Doctors will sometimes inform families, but again, it's going to be limited information. Or it's going to be, you must do this, or this is better. They're not giving families full information with neutrality. Oh, the hearing aid is the only thing available. But why is that? Is it going to impact early language acquisition? What about a visual modality for communication? They're not sharing that information. And that can be really any professional that's working with the families. Now, going to the early childhood educators, those who are familiar, it could be oral language communication mode, it could be visual communication mode, whatever, but it's varied. So that is still another challenge, because even though they may be experts in one particular field of deafness and communication modalities. But again, not all states are the same. Some states do have that connection made to the families and the early childhood educators. They have that process. They've identified through screening a deaf and hard of hearing baby or child, and they're connected and they get access to the early language acquisition. But some states do not, and they do not make that connection for the families. There may not be a deaf program or a deaf school in that state. and they stop the connection with the families at early intervention service providers who, again, are not familiar with language acquisition for these young children. So once they kind of get connected and are familiar with a professional with early language knowledge, that's when they go into deaf programs or deaf schools and they have that access. So that connection with early language acquisition is vital and doesn't happen as quickly as it should. Now, the secondary thing with early childhood educators, there are some out there that have deaf and hard of hearing expertise, but they may not share, they may not be shared with the families. Throughout the entire system, they may delay and never refer to that expert. Some states may use their expert wisely, some don't. So it's inconsistent. And again, going back to the gray, any professional, it is very common for a professional that's working with the family to have a conflict in cultural values. It could be based on race, it could be based on just personal values, and then biases and thinking that my values are going to be the better ones. So it's actually very common that this occurs. And then the results of all of this in the blue. Many, actually one too many of the parents feel they receive limited information, not enough training or information on where their child can acquire this language during this critical window of time. So it is making a huge impact on these families, trying to navigate through the entire system that still has many gaps and weakened connections and links to the services that need to be provided. So that's what we know, and what we really identified as what we need. So the REAL team, what our work is, it's the Regional Early Acquisition to Language. That program, our work entails the following. Our goal is for early language acquisition to be accessible for all children birth to 3. Now, at the CLEAR Center, we do have a group that work together, and we have included other stakeholders from the Gallaudet community and outside to support these families and these babies for early language acquisition. Now, you also see here the Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind. They have a center founded there where they have a team working in order to provide support, resources, advocacy for those babies and families that are identified deaf and hard of hearing within 9 states in their region. And we sponsor and support them, those 9 states in the Southeast region, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. All right, look at that, I got them all. Whoop, whoop. Okay, so those are our partnerships right now with Gallaudet, with REAL, and with AIDB. Now at REAL, we provide 3 main things. We provide technical assistance, training, and resources. And those are for those categories of individuals that I've already named in those colors. And it really focuses on early language acquisition that is accessible. That's the key there. It needs to fit with the individual and the families. So we provide these 3 things for those groups of individuals: the first responders, the early intervention service providers, the early childhood educators, and parents and caregivers, coordinating that access to the information regarding early language acquisition. And again, this is just a repeat of who we provide these services to. Those first responders, what kind of information they need to know is going to be different from the early childhood educators who may already have the information and just have some gaps that need to be filled in, or the early intervention service providers and how they can connect better and basically have a streamlined information pathway through these service providers and these individuals for the families and the babies. Okay. So Debbie just explained REAL's work, but now within the different states, what does this all mean to you all? What does the EHDI system really look like within your state? What information would be helpful to know? I mean, just basic information. Who is your EHDI coordinator for the state? What is their contact information? Who are the committee members? Who are the individuals or the agencies providing screening and follow-up services? Who are those service providers? Are they experienced or inexperienced with deaf and hard of hearing children? Are they familiar with early language acquisition? That's the information you need to know. But also what's important to know is what resources, materials, and information are out there for parents and caregivers. Or what training is made available for those service providers and the parents and caregivers? What's already happening in your state? What are they receiving currently? And then what information on services, supports, resources are available for parents and caregivers? Does your state have any of that information available? Some will just say the website has information there, but is the website in-depth information? Is it navigational? Is it easily read by the user? Next. There we go. Now, related to early intervention, that referral process. Who makes the original referral? Is it the professional or is it the parent or is it a team effort on both of them? What does that look like? What is effective? Who receives the referral? Like Debbie had explained, some states, that referral process sometimes goes to directly the early intervention agency and doesn't involve deaf schools until much later on. So it's interesting to find out who receives that referral for deaf and hard of hearing children. And again, that contact information. I mean, it can be very difficult to find contact information for these professionals. It may be old, outdated information. There's high turnover, so maybe that information is incorrect. So you have to really navigate through a large network. And then there are different types of early intervention services that are provided to parents and caregivers. And what material do parents and caregivers receive from these service providers? What information is missing and what information does it have? And then again, who provides those services, that information to the parents? Find. So I think it's important to have a good relationship and collaboration with EHDI, with those key stakeholders within the system, figuring out the process, navigating that flow map, and perhaps reconstructing the concept of EHDI as a whole. I agree. And related to those early intervention professionals, are they specialized in deaf and hard of hearing? Are they a good match for the families that they have on their caseload? Families are the most important group. Their needs, their knowledge, their strugglings with things that they're experiencing, the type of relationship that is developed with a professional needs to be important for them. It needs to be an area of support and comfort. Okay. Well, I am going to go ahead and stop my screen share. All right. Does anyone have any questions or want to share some things? I've seen a few of the comments. This information, again, we have worked and collaborated with CEASD and developed this flow chart and shared it with CEASD. I'm sure they can share that with their members in the schools. So you can kind of delve in and investigate your own EHDI system within your state. And hopefully we can work out logistically providing more supports for those families and students in early language acquisition. Any questions, comments? Okay, I'll give you another minute or two to type in anything. And if not, then we are done with our presentation. Okay, well, it seems to be a very quiet audience today. I hope that means that it was good information and you feel good about it. Feel free to contact either one of us if you have questions or if you want to talk about this more in depth, talking about real and the work that we do pertaining to the EHDI system and how to really better support and improve the system overall. But that does end our presentation today, and that is the last CEASD online session. Oh, thank you, Stacy. Yes, and really it is hard work, but it is enjoyable and essential work that we do. So, as I mentioned, this is the last online session we've had for this year. We at CEASD wish you a wonderful close to the end of your year. And we really look forward to seeing more of you coming up in the fall, but let's focus on summer first. So Bobby Scoggins actually asked, what type of technical assistance can you offer states in establishing strategic goals on state level? So, for example, with the 9 southeastern states that we work with, we help the team focus on what each state needs there. And so we try to focus on what is the overall vision. Once we've established that, we try to identify who and where in each state those can be found. Once we figure out individuals from that state, what the system may look like, where are those gaps? What positive resources do you have? What positives can you bring into the team? And then we bring it all together, hopefully, to support the state. And that's what we do to support those 9 southeastern states. But if there's specific information that's needed about early language acquisition, we can provide that. We can bring that to the team. Yes, so Claire mentioned we do have a new strategic plan goal, and I am on that committee for that goal, to hopefully provide that technical assistance to member schools. So we will be partnering with that. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you so much. And on that note, have a fabulous summer. Yes, and you know how to reach us for that support, Bobby. Okay, well, thank you all very much and take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Claire.